And we're going to debate in the next hour, would Jeremy Corbyn be able to negotiate a better deal? I mean, he's up in the polls, he's at 40%, he's 4 points
Listen,
clear.
Labour should be 20 ahead.
Well,
now,
I agree with that too. Do we have faith in him? We're also going to have David Wooding in, the political editor from The Sun on Sunday, who of course have been supporting Brexit and supporting Theresa May, to see how long that can continue and how long that can last. So please, could Corbyn do a better job? 0345 6060 973. So Jeremy Corbyn up in the polls, out on the television being interviewed, and he's basically saying that he thinks he could negotiate a better deal in the next 3 months than the Conservatives have been able to do in the last 2.5 years. Here was Jeremy Corbyn being interviewed by Sophie Ridge on Sky News this morning.
It's an option for the future, but it's not an option for today, because if we put a referendum tomorrow, what's it going to be on? The government must go back and renegotiate and see what it comes back with, and Parliament must look at that time. To do anything else now would be to ignore the reality of the situation, is that this government has had all this time to negotiate and hasn't really achieved anything.
So it's not a second referendum for now, it is a renegotiation. He could do a better job. Mind you, I remember Tony Blair in 2005 when he held the rotating presidency of the EU, attempting a renegotiation on the common agricultural policy and failing dismally. In fact, he finished up giving away £7 billion of the British rebate in return for a promise from the French that they might look at reform of the CAP, which never ever happened. But do we actually think that Labour and Corbyn could do a better job? Or is the truth of it that actually they're pretty split too? Because Corbyn, again, quite clearly saying no second referendum for now, and in fact saying in an interview with Der Spiegel, making it absolutely clear that we can't stop Brexit. We're leaving on March the 29th, only to be completely contradicted by Keir Starmer and many other senior Labour figures. I wonder what Craig, a new caller from Oxford, makes of this. Good morning, Craig.
Morning, Nigel. It's a pleasure.
Well, thank you for coming on. I mean, do you think Corbyn would do a better job than Mrs May?
I think the problem that we have is in the skill set and the mindset of the politicians in general. I'm an engineer, and much like a doctor, I spend my life going places, identifying a problem, implementing a solution, and making things work. And that's how my mind works. It seems to me that the only way politicians' minds work is to adequately perform their weekly Wednesday pantomime. And they don't necessarily have the skill set or the mindset to resolve the Brexit issue. And this is further compounded by the fact that Jeremy Corbyn seems to still think a deal could be negotiated in the implementation period, or this 2-year Article 50 process. That's not the way it can happen. The only way we can get our golden deal, our perfect situation, was for someone to have come to the forefront and said that the EU cannot afford to lose face. There's no way they'll agree a deal in 2 years. So we have to go through the motions. We'll ask for the golden deal. We'll negotiate what we can. We'll come to terms with the fact that we can't get it in 2 years. Leave under WTO rules.
Yep.
And then form our trade deals with Japan, China, India, Australia, New Zealand, America, Canada, all around, which further strengthens our situation and further compounds the EU situation, where countries start pressuring the bureaucrats that are unelected.
Craig, if we left on WTO terms, Craig, they'd come running down the road after us, wouldn't they?
They would. And as I said, with every deal we negotiated, our position gets stronger, theirs gets weaker, and then we get closer towards that golden deal. And for Alistair Campbell to turn around and say that you can't get a deal that pleases both sides, actually you can. If you get the perfect Brexit deal, or close to it, where you get all of the benefits with none of the drawbacks, does that not please both sides?
And that is through a free trade deal, Craig, ultimately.
Ultimately, yeah.
Ultimately, yeah.
Unfortunately, politicians don't have the skill set, the mindset, or the capability to do that, because that's not how their mind works.
And the other problem, Craig, is that our politicians, 70% probably of our parliament, maybe a tad more, just don't believe in Brexit. So they're being asked to carry something out that they simply don't believe in. And that, to me, is a big part of the problem. Plus, I think, Craig, a massive failure of leadership from the Prime Minister. What do you think?
Well, I think politicians have lost the scope or the reason why they're there. They're elected to represent the people, not themselves. And it's not about what they think. It's about influencing what the people think.
No.
So whether or not they want to vote for something is irrelevant. They need to do what the people have put them there to do.
And they promised they'd do it, didn't they? They promised they'd do it. We will implement Brexit. Craig, thank you for your points and your thoughts. And Craig there, an engineer, a practical person that looks to solve problems. He doesn't seem to think our politicians have really got what it takes these days. Congratulations, Nigel and Alistair. A great discussion, with you both being respectful and polite. Will you be exchanging Christmas cards now, says Simon in Leicestershire? Well, actually, I mean, I think there were one or two heated moments. We have strong disagreement. But I think we actually agree quite a lot on that this deal is just an absolutely awful deal. Definitely yes, Nigel. Mr. Corbyn should be given the chance and a general election should now be called. Well, if and when this vote is lost in Parliament, which I believe it will be within the next 2 to 3 weeks, there will be calls for a general election. But looking at those opinion polls that I read out this morning, I can't see Mrs. May, or if she's gone an interim leader or whatever it may be, I can't see them being very keen on calling a general election. And Mary says Corbyn would be just as bad as Mrs. May. Maybe, folks, the truth is that with Barnier and Juncker and Tusk, actually, we're wasting our time trying to get a sensible deal out of people who want to punish us because they're really scared that the Italians and others might do the same thing. Valerie is calling from Islington. Good morning, Valerie.
Good morning, Nigel. This is the first time I'm to your show.
Well, welcome.
I've often listened to you, and you're very passionate about what you want to do and what all of us should do. But my question is, the question on the table is, would Jeremy do a better deal?
Yeah.
I believe that Jeremy would do a better deal. I know Jeremy personally, and I know with his humility, I believe that he will do a better deal. Obviously, Theresa May is, she's tried, and that failed. And I think that given the chance, Jeremy would definitely do a better deal.
Valerie, is he your MP?
He is my MP.
Yep.
Yes. And does that mean I'm biased?
No,
Yes,
listen, I'm interested. I'm genuinely interested. So, I mean, how well do you know Mr. Corbyn?
I know Mr. Corbyn for years because I've often gone out and helped to canvass and get votes and so on. So I know. I'm studying politics at the moment at uni. Mm-hmm. And from what I'm seeing, and I love that quote by Rousseau, man is born free, but everywhere in chains.
Yeah.
We're in chains because we buy into some of these things that sometimes we're not able to get out of, or in order to be part of society, we have to tie up ourselves. Now, right now, ideally, I think Britain and the UK should not leave Europe, because now that it's all unraveled, we can see what will happen. And Britain will not any longer be or the UK will not any longer be the UK that people have known it to be. Free, and we can go anywhere in the world and do things.
Valerie, isn't the problem less with Brexit and more to do with the Prime Minister, who's made a complete hash of it?
Well, what is happening is, when you have a team of people you're supposed to be able to trust, the electorate put on the table, we ask that the party in power represent us. What is happening is everyone that seems to be in the Conservative right now, bar from a few, seem to be just representing themselves.
Well, there's a lot of factionalism, Valerie, I get that. But Valerie, here's a point for you.
Yeah.
You're saying we should stay in. And yet Jeremy Corbyn, ever since he first became an MP back in 1983, has voted against every single European treaty that has ever come before the House of Commons.
Yeah.
He has always been absolutely opposed to our membership of the European Club on the grounds that he believes in national democracy. So, I mean, you disagree with him on that point, do you?
It's not that I disagree with him. Everybody has their own personal, because remember, he was not acting on behalf of the party then. He was acting on his own principle, from what I may understand. This is just me saying that. But what I'm saying here is, sometimes when you're on the other side, sometimes you may be the person to get a better deal. I know that Theresa May has tried that, but we also live in a society right now where it shouldn't be happening. But I'm wondering if it was that she was a man, she would have got a better deal. But she doesn't have a good team around her because everyone's looking out for her for themselves.
And Valerie, she's got a split party. And I just think Jeremy Corbyn, his instincts and Keir Starmer's instincts are clearly completely different on this issue. And I just wonder whether if Labour were in charge of this, it would be them now going through this massive internal row and not the Conservatives. And that's just...
I think we diplomatically, we would be doing this better, because when you deal with peace and conflict, you can't go into a negotiation with, war. You have to go in wanting peace. You want to go in and deal with it diplomatically, and I think that's not done properly.
Okay.
And get some really great negotiators in.
All right, no, Valerie thinks Corbyn would do a good job with the right team around him, and I thank you, Valerie, for your call and insight into Jeremy Corbyn. Anyway, there's a bit of really good news, folks, this morning. I'm sure you're all very cheered to know who the new Brexit Secretary is. Yep, it's Stephen Barclay. Ever heard of him? Have you ever heard of him? I asked a room full of 240 people on Friday night this question, and admittedly, it was in the West Country, it wasn't in his own North East Cambridgeshire constituency, and only one person out of 240 had ever heard of him, or thought that they might have heard of him. I did once say to Herman Van Rompuy, "Who are you?" And I could do much the same, couldn't I, with this new Brexit secretary. But it doesn't matter who the Brexit secretary is. Doesn't matter whether it's David Davis or Dominic Raab or Stephen Barclay, because they're not running this. The civil service are running this. Ollie Robbins and the others are completely in charge of this process, and that is why the withdrawal agreement keeps us so closely trapped, designed to be in perpetuity within the European Union. The civil service are running this process. I have called them the enemy within and been abused for doing so. I repeat that phrase this morning. You're listening to a Sunday edition of the Nigel Farage Show here on LBC, and it's now 11:15. Could Jeremy Corbyn and the Labour Party do a better job of this negotiation? I don't think so. They're pretty split as well, and of course there's a lot of pressure within the Conservative Party for a second referendum. Quite a lot of people in Momentum, I've got the impression, that they just don't want to leave at all. Nigel, if Corbyn got in, Brexit would be off the table because of Momentum, suggests Chris in Darlington. Nigel, all Corbyn has to do is play the waiting game. The Labour Party will win the next general election with a landslide. He's played a blinder, says Laura from Shenfield. Well, I tell you what, Laura, I believe. I believe that if this deal gets voted through in the House of Commons in 2 to 3 weeks' time, I think there's no chance of the Conservatives winning the next election, because millions of them will simply sit at home and say, I don't want Corbyn, but actually this is an act of betrayal. And I think this poses a cataclysmic electoral problem for the Tories. Brett is a new caller from Frogmore in South Devon. Good morning, Brett.
Hello, good morning, Nigel. Nice to speak to you.
Good to speak to you.
This all reminds me of an old adage about politics, which is that it doesn't really matter who you vote for, because the government always gets back in. And I think this reinforces what you were saying a few minutes ago about the fact that these negotiations have not been conducted at all, as far as I can see, by the people who were supposedly appointed to carry them out, be it David Davis or Dominic Raab. As the facts have slowly emerged, coming up to Chequers and immediately after Chequers, David Davis was seemingly deliberately kept out of the loop. And all the time, there was a parallel set of negotiations being carried on with the EU by a team led by Ollie Robbins. Now, I don't think enough has been made of this by the Leavers or the Brexiteers. And this is why it doesn't really matter whether Jeremy Corbyn gets elected or put into power. It won't matter if the same team are conducting the negotiations. If you have a Remainer establishment and a Remainer Prime Minister and a Remainer majority cabinet in charge of these negotiations, what chance was there ever that
Wow.
we would get the Brexit that we voted for.
And look at it now, Brett. Amber Rudd's back in the cabinet.
Oh, God forbid. Yes, quite.
Stephen Hammond, who is, one of the biggest Europhiles in the world. It's a more Europhile cabinet now than it ever was, Brett, isn't it?
Well, it is, and I am absolutely disgusted with the Tory MPs. I was a lifelong Tory voter. I'm 66 now, until about 20 years ago when I stopped and I joined UKIP. Now, that's by the by. I stood for Parliament as well in 2010.
Okay.
And I've had these arguments with people for many, many years. When I see people who are supposedly Brexiteers continually accept what is a non-Brexiteer argument or position.
It's a charade, Brett, isn't it?
It is a charade. It's a game to them. It isn't a game to me. I want to say something. I run my own small manufacturing business, a one-man manufacturing business. Within 2 or 3 days of the result of the 2016 referendum, my phone didn't stop ringing for 12 months. With orders, business inquiries, there was a tremendous sense of euphoria amongst the people I was speaking to who shared my opinion that finally we were going to be free of the EU and could decide our own destiny. Gradually, over the last 12 months, the people's thoughts and attitudes seem to have changed as they've realised that we are being sold down the river and virtually nobody would be trying to stop it. That level of business has diminished and diminished and diminished.
Yeah, there's a bit of gloom out there, isn't there? There's a bit of gloom around. Yeah, there is.
That hope of the future has gone.
Brett, what do you, I get your passion, I understand what you do. What do you hope happens from here?
There can only be one solution, which I hope will be put in place. Theresa May has to go.
Yep.
That's number one.
I agree with that.
There cannot be any future with her in charge, because she's going to back up Ollie Robbins and his team, who are working basically against what we voted for.
Yes.
The Brexiteers have got to get their act together and depose Theresa May. I don't care whether it's a caretaker Prime Minister in the shape of David Davis or Dominic Raab or a combination of them or Boris Johnson.
Just someone that believes in it would help, wouldn't it?
We have to have somebody heading the whole thing up who passionately believes that Brexit is our future and that the future of this country... I've got 4 children and now a grandchild as well. I don't want them growing up in this so-called vassal state whereby, we cannot make our own decisions, our laws, etc., etc. WTO is an option. It's not a no deal. It's an option. It's the way we deal with the whole of the rest of the world. It doesn't frighten me in the slightest.
Okay.
The only thing that frightens me is if our future is decided by other people. I don't care, or people we can't elect or get rid of. I don't care what the world throws at us, as long as we can control our own destiny and make the best of whatever hand we're given.
Brett, you've made the point very passionately. Thank you. And just backing up Brett's point, very interesting piece by Quentin Letts in today's Sunday Telegraph. The Prime Minister threatens to neutralise Brexit, disable our sovereignty and obliterate the Conservative Party. Wow, that's pretty strong stuff. And I will be asking the political editor of The Sun on Sunday in a minute just what The Sun are really thinking about Theresa May. But Luke is a new caller from Ipswich. Luke, tell me that the Labour Party could do a fantastic job of this, please.
Good morning, my friend.
Good morning.
I'm going to keep it simple.
Yep.
The way I see it, I think we've got 2 options at the moment on the table, and it's who are we going to let drive the bus, Stevie Wonder or Ray Charles? Honestly, nobody seems to know. Like, if Labour get in, because of everything that's going on with the Conservatives, if Labour do get in, then you've not only got to look at what will happen with Brexit, but you've also got to look at the way Corbyn is generally. He will go after big business, he'll push them out, and this is what we've got to realise as well. Even if he did get us a Brexit, what's he going to do?
Well, actually, Luke, if he got us a Brexit, a proper Brexit, where we became an independent, self-governing nation, it wouldn't matter that much what he did, because he could only do it for a short period of time. We could then vote for somebody else to reverse all of it, couldn't we? I mean, that is the essence of what parliamentary democracy is. And my problem with Theresa May's proposal is all the rules and regulations that affect the whole of British business, we won't be able to change any of, stuck in that customs union.
Yeah, and that's the thing. I don't understand how she's even... How she can stand there with a straight face and say that she's got us the best deal that was possible, because it's worse than anything.
Yes.
We're completely locked in. There's no way out of it. And that's what a lot of people won't admit, apart from the people that see it for what it is.
But it sounds to me, Luke, with what you said about Jeremy Corbyn, that whatever you think of this deal and whatever you think of Theresa May, you're still going to vote for her.
I'm UKIP myself.
Oh, are you? Right, okay.
Yeah, to be honest, I was quite disappointed that you did leave.
Well, I haven't left. I'm just not leader of it anymore. And I'm still, leading a group in the European Parliament. But I'm not running the thing on a day-to-day basis. Yeah. Thank goodness.
I think you would have been a lot better to stay on, and the party would be a lot higher up in the rankings.
Yeah, and I realised that if I'd done that, and it would have been another 10 years, and I thought, no, I don't fancy that. Luke, thank you. I'm off to Eastbourne to speak to Lynn, a new caller. Good morning, Lynn.
Hello, Nigel.
So, could Corbyn do a better job?
No, he couldn't at all, because the job can't be done. But what I want to say is that what has happened here, you British are not believing in yourselves through all of this, and I have to say that you're the sharpest, you're known to be, the sharpest business people in the world, that this is facing a cliff. It's absolutely ridiculous. We were working with British business intelligence in the British Embassy back in the 1970s. You all were owning some of the most major companies in America, and typically you didn't want everybody in America to know that, but that's the way that you work. This is absolutely ridiculous. You're facing a wide-open future. It's been long in coming. You should definitely go for it and believe in yourselves. This is absolutely ridiculous.
Well, Lynn, our complete loss of self-confidence, at least that loss amongst our leaders, is absolutely right. And one of the arguments I made all through the referendum is that our political class arguing for us to stay part of this club, they just don't believe we're good enough to run our own country. And Lynn, that to me is at the root of much of this.
That is at the root of it. It has to be self-belief. Morale is everything. Morale and integrity. You don't have the integrity with the EU. You certainly don't have that. The mindset that could pass a law, for instance, that people in jail for pedophilia had to have access to child porn. You have incredible, I don't think they know who's making these decisions. You have to be out, and you have to be out for the sake of America as well. And as a matter of fact, I think for Western civilization, you have to be.
Lynn, do you know something? Not only are we the laughing stock of Brussels, and how happy they were in the members' bar in Strasbourg last week when I was there, but I think increasingly my American friends say, so are you telling me then that there's no prospect of us doing a trade deal for at least another 3 years, or is it 5 years? Why would anyone, Lynn, actually take us seriously? And that's the problem. How long have you lived here, Lynn?
40 years.
40 years, right. And do you think we're approaching the worst crisis you've seen in that period?
I think that you're approaching the biggest opportunity that you've had in all that time.
Yeah, well, no, listen, I don't disagree with a word of that. Lynn, thank you for the call. I've always believed that. Massive opportunity, but you have to believe in it. And above all, the leader has to believe in it. And Theresa May doesn't believe in it. And here's the irony. Jeremy Corbyn does believe in it. So on the face of it, I should say he'd make a better job of doing the negotiation. But once again, he's never worked in the real world of business. None of these people have ever been involved in negotiations that matter. I also think he'd be completely hamstrung by his own party, who are pretty Remain. You're listening to the Sunday edition of the Nigel Farage Show here on LBC. It's now 11:30 and time for the news with Philip Chrysikos. In 10 minutes or so, we'll be joined by the Liberal Democrat leader, Vince Cable, and we're debating who would do the best job at delivering Brexit in these negotiations. Could Corbyn have done a better job? But I'm very, very keen to talk next to David Wooding, political editor of The Sun on Sunday. Good morning, David.
Good morning, Nigel.
Now, you have been, as a newspaper, very pro-Brexit, and you've been very supportive of the Prime Minister. In your opinion, is there going to be 48 letters this week and a vote?
Well, it's a very tricky question, that. I was speaking to Graham Brady both yesterday and just in the last hour.
Yeah.
And he keeps his cards and his letters, for that matter, very close to his chest.
Yeah.
So it's difficult to know. I felt steam had gone out of it a little bit when Jacob Rees-Mogg, the European Research Group chairman, stood outside the Commons with a throng of journalists around him, announced he was putting in a letter and urging other people to do so, and then Theresa May managed to limp through to the weekend without the full 48 going in. The suspicion is that she's within fewer than a dozen letters of triggering an election. But I think the big thing that people will be thinking about this weekend, the MPs, apart from talking to their constituency chairmen and women and their local membership to see how they feel, they'll be wondering who is going to be the leader if they topple Theresa May. That's the first question, because they need to be able to unite behind somebody, and there's a field of about 7 or 8 people who will run. And secondly, what if she wins this? Could it strengthen her position? So it's not quite as simple as bring down the Prime Minister. There's a lot more to be thought about, I think.
So, but she could survive as Prime Minister. The 48 letters not get reached. She could do that, but she could still lose this vote on this deal, David, couldn't she?
Yes, absolutely. And this is what... this is a disagreement in the cabinet between the people such as Dominic Raab and Esther McVeigh, who both resigned among the 7 other ministers and aides who did so. They felt that we have to get rid of Theresa May because she is hopeless at A, negotiating, and B, has secured a rotten deal. But others feel that something can still be done. There's this so-called pizza group of 5, Andrea Leadsom, Michael Gove among them, Penny Mordaunt, who believe that they can renegotiate the deal, even at this late stage with the summit just a week away.
And your newspaper,
about that.
David, your newspaper sort of says here, I mean, I'm looking at your editorial main piece today, and it says the Prime Minister must give the Brexiteers and the Cabinet the chance to shape the political declaration outlining our future relations with the European Union. So, OK, we've got 2 things here. We've got a withdrawal agreement and a non-binding 7-page political declaration pointing the way ahead. Are you saying, through your editorial on The Sun on Sunday, and I noticed that she's writing Theresa May for you exclusively today, are you saying as a newspaper that your support is still with the Prime Minister and with this withdrawal agreement?
It's not with the withdrawal agreement at all. We do not think the withdrawal agreement is a good agreement. The difficulty is that there are 585 pages of the withdrawal agreement, and as you rightly say, Nigel, only 7 pages of the future relationship. That's 1% of the withdrawal deal.
Yes.
So I think what maybe we'll be seeing from the Prime Minister is a bit more on what's in that future relationship agreement. She needs the European Union to give her something, but of course she'll have with her in the cabinet people pushing her to try and change this deal. Lots of people, yourself included, I suspect, feel it would be much easier to rip this thing up and start again. But time is running out, so it's very, very difficult to know where she turns from here.
And if she loses that vote in the House of Commons, you've been studying this for a few decades, would that not be the biggest political crisis of modern times?
It certainly would. With a couple of months to go till Brexit, both sides are playing a real game of poker here, because the hardline Brexiteers believe there's nothing that could stop a departure on World Trade Organization terms. That's what the critics call a hard Brexit, or crashing out, or cliff edge. And but then there's the other side, the Remainers among them, who believe that would be a disaster and that they could possibly force a second referendum. So you sense that both sides are playing a game of dare or stir, or somebody's got to blink here on this.
Well, I tell you what,
something's got to happen.
I tell you what, David, none of us will be taking any holidays this side of Christmas. Thank you very much indeed for joining us this morning. It was David Wooding, political editor of The Sun on Sunday, saying that he'd spoken to Graham Brady this morning, who seemed to indicate there weren't 48 letters in. But I guess it depends a little bit whether letters have been delivered, I suppose, and whether they were copied by email. John is calling from Newcastle. John, could Corbyn and Labour make a better fist of it than the Tories have done?
Absolutely not. No chance.
Right.
Over the last 2 years, on a week-to-week basis, if you could tell me what the Labour Party policy was consistently on Brexit, I'd be very interested to hear it.
Yeah, they're all over the shop, aren't they? And they keep contradicting each other, John, don't they?
Well, you get Corbyn will give an interview saying that he would take us out, and then 20 minutes later, Mr. Starmer's pops up on TV to say the total opposite, along with Emily Thornberry and Chami Chakrabarti, who was on the Andrew Marr show this morning.
Yeah.
And he was pointing out that Mrs May's deal pretty much gives Labour what they want in terms of remaining in the customs union and the single market. And yet she got flustered and denied it and couldn't answer the question. So what this has proved is that our members of Parliament are experts in manipulation. They are self-serving. They've done nothing for the UK public. What they had the right to do as a government and as members of Parliament was to point out that, well, look, if we do this, if we do X, then Y could possibly happen. Yes, there could be some pain, but ultimately they have to serve the British public and they have to give us Brexit.
Are you one of those people, John, who's beginning to say, I might not bother to vote for anybody next time round?
Oh, no, I'm going to vote.
You are going to vote? Okay.
I always vote. I think this has exposed politicians in the Houses of Parliament once again. I mean, a few years ago we had the expenses scandal, and we thought that there'd been a clean-up after that, and there absolutely hasn't. Absolutely hasn't. This isn't everything that's happening at the moment is not about what's best for this country. It's about protecting themselves. They are playing party politics with us to the detriment of the country.
I tell you what, John, given those views, it must be tough to know who to vote for. John, I thank you. I'm going to run on and go to Neil in Boreham Wood. Neil, could Corbyn do a better job?
Well, Nigel, what you said a few minutes earlier on before the news about the fact that if Corbyn got in, there'd be a bit of a disaster with the economy, but we'd get a Brexit. What worries me is...
I was hypothetically saying...
I get it. But Nigel, what I'm concerned is a vote for Corbyn might be a vote for Brexit, but you're also voting for a re-entry into Europe and accepting the euro, because it'd be the only way of bailing the UK out of the biggest bankruptcy ever.
OK, so you think a Corbyn government will lead us to literally going bust?
Absolutely, and without any choice, we'd have to rejoin Europe if they did. They're probably the only people that would accept it. How would we be bailed out?
Well, I look, I mean, we did have the IMF, of course, bail us out back in 1976, and that was a Labour government, to be fair. Right, so do you think the economic threat of Corbyn is a bigger risk to this country than how we deal with Brexit?
Yes.
Okay.
I believe they're combined. They're intrinsically related.
It's interesting.
But my overarching point is that if Corbyn gets in, he may very well be able to negotiate a Brexit. I don't believe it will be any better, but then the economic risk will be...
Neil,
Nigel.
No, you made your point. Thank you. And actually, I'm going to back Neil up, that looking at these opinion polls, if the international markets begin to think that a Corbyn government is likely, then I think you'll see the pound go to parity against both the dollar and the euro. Such will be the economic fear of what they might do. Real or not, but that's how markets tend to behave. Nigel, nobody knows what Corbyn would do on Brexit. He's kept very quiet for the last 2 years, and his party is as split as the rest of us, says PK in Hearts. Yeah, the real Labour split is not in the House of Commons. The real Labour split is between them and their voters, about 40% of whom did vote for Brexit. 5 million people who voted Corbyn had voted for Brexit the year before. Michael is calling from Lanzarote. Hi, Michael.
Hi, Nigel.
How you doing?
I'm all right.
Good.
No problem. Sat looking at the sea.
Lovely. So who is the best person to do Brexit?
None of the people in charge. We need somebody who believes in the country.
Yep.
No, we've got the upper hand here. If I'm an international haulier, I go abroad a lot. I've seen the state that Europe's in through the EU, immigration, etc. But if you see all the foreign trucks sat on the ports in France and in Spain coming to our country with their goods, we import more than we export. We've got the upper hand. Do you not think these suppliers are going to be up in arms if they lose their biggest market?
Yeah. Yeah, Michael,
beyond belief.
Do you know, Michael, about 20 years ago, an old fisherman said to me, he said, you know those 10,000 trucks that come through the Channel Tunnel every day? Do you think they'll stop coming if we leave the common market? And it rather sums up the point you're making. Michael from Lanzarote, thank you for your call. He makes the point. We've actually got a very good negotiating hand, if only we understood it. If only we had people in politics running the country who'd actually had a proper job and worked in business, it would make a very real difference, in my view. You're listening to the Sunday edition of the Nigel Farage Show here on LBC, and it's 11:45. Who would do the best job negotiating Brexit? Where are we going with all of this? Well, joining me is Sir Vince Cable, leader of the Liberal Democrats. Good morning, Sir Vince.
Good morning, Nigel.
Now, looking at this withdrawal agreement, we're going to be inside the customs union, inside the single market rules. We're going to maintain free movement of people, perhaps in perpetuity. All we're doing is slightly changing the name. You must be very happy with this deal.
No, not at all. I mean, I do agree with you on your analysis that in many respects we're keeping all the rules of the European Union, but we, in future, will have no say over them. I mean, when I was Secretary of State, we had repeated occasions when the European Commission would come up with ideas on state aids or competition or regulation, and we objected and were able to change it in the Council of Ministers. We will no longer have that degree of control. I mean, I think we disagree on the basic outcome, but I think we do agree in our analysis of this dud agreement that Theresa May's brought back.
So you're going to vote against it, the Lib Dems are going to vote against it, and it kind of looks, if you look at the arithmetic, it seems inevitable, doesn't it, that it's going to fail in Parliament?
It does look inevitable. The numbers don't add up. And I think the big question about where we go from there, a lot of this hinges on Jeremy Corbyn. I mean, he gave a terrible interview this morning, confirmed a complete lack of leadership. I mean, whereas you've been long campaigning for Brexit openly, I think he's trying to achieve it by stealth. I think if he put his weight behind the call for a referendum, a people's vote, I think that would now happen, but he's backing off, and as a result we have no clarity at all about what happens when the government's position is voted down.
Now, whether or not we have Mrs May as our Prime Minister, I've got to ask you, Sir Vince, if we had a second referendum, there is no polling evidence that we get a different result at all. We occasionally see a poll that puts Remain a little bit ahead, and then we see one today that shows that slip back. So if we get if you get your second referendum, and we vote, this time 54% to 46, I mean, will you accept a second result?
Yes, I think we'd have to.
Right, but why?
I certainly would if I were part of leading the campaign for Remain. I certainly would accept the result, whichever way it went.
But didn't you all say you'd accept the result of the first referendum?
No, I don't think so, because it was based on, as you know, on promises, on the expectation of what Brexit might produce. I think fairly shortly after the referendum, a lot of people started to argue that we needed to have a new go at this because the outcome was likely to be very different from what people had voted for, and indeed that's exactly what's happened.
Well, lots of people in life make promises, including many of the pro-EU establishment in this country, sort of calling me a wild fantasist for suggesting that the European army was going to move and change in terms of foreign policy and indeed in terms of militarisation. And Angela Merkel this was Angela Merkel, Sir Vince, on Tuesday of this week.
What we should do, and this is really important if we look at the developments of the past years, we have to work on a vision of one day creating a real, true European army.
So, your predecessor, Nick Clegg, in open debate with me in 2014, said it was a dangerous fantasy to say the European Union wanted an army.
Well, there are some people within it who do want a European army. That's perfectly true. And
the German Chancellor, there's the French President, there's the Euro. I mean, it's happening, isn't it?
What they're arguing is that in this very dangerous, changing world of which Mr. Trump is part, we should be having more cooperation on military matters with the rest of the European Union, and that seems to me perfectly sensible and pragmatic, and we can play as much or as little a part in that as we wish.
So you support the idea of a European army?
No, I don't. I support
like
the idea of military cooperation between independent armies, which is a different thing.
Well, that's not what Mrs. Merkel's talking about. This is the problem, isn't it, in a way? That every time my side of the argument says they're building a superpower, they want to be an empire, by the way. The French finance minister this week said we're building an empire. Every time we put this to you, you deny it to us.
Well, I'm denying that that's what the state of affairs is. When we don't have a European army, we have quite a lot of military cooperation. We worked with the French on Libya, for example, not with great success, I have to say, but there was cooperation. There's going to have to be more. I mean, the idea about whether you have a multinational army or not depends on, as you know, on complex issues around the command structure. Are we more or less like NATO, or is there some new structure? I mean, this debate might happen in 10 years' time, but we don't have a European
it's
army.
Happening
there
now.
isn't one in immediate prospect.
No.
There are some people who have a vision of one, but it isn't there.
It's going to be completed by 2025, according to all the leaders of Europe. Anyway, Sir Vince, we can argue that forever. I just want to ask you, finally, to make a prediction. Do you think...
I think we're going to finish up with no Brexit.
You think no Brexit? Right, OK. And does that mean a second referendum, then?
Yes, that's the mechanism, but I think if it may well be that there's no agreement in Parliament to do anything, and I think if that happens, that rather than having a chaotic outcome, Parliament will vote to rescind Article 50. You asked for a prediction?
Yeah, no, I've got one, absolutely. You couldn't be clearer. Thank you very much indeed for joining us this morning. Sir Vince Cable, very clear what he thinks, no messing in that regard. Corbyn wouldn't get a better deal. He's a leaver, and the Blairites wouldn't let him do anything that looked like leaving, says Philip in Whiteleaf. Sarah is a new caller from Weybridge in Surrey. Good morning, Sarah.
Oh, hello. Hi, Nigel. Thanks so much for having me.
Welcome.
So, yes, well, I was explaining that that I think that I got put through because I said that, I'm a true blue voter.
Right.
Voted Conservative all of my life.
Uh-huh.
And I've been wondering about Corbyn. But actually, Nigel, there's something else, which is that it's Carol Cadwallader from The Observer here.
Oh, go away. Honestly, you are a ranting lunatic. I mean, in a sense, yeah. Let's go to John in Clapham.
Hello, Nigel. Nice to speak to you. I think that basically it shouldn't just be one party that is running the Brexit negotiations. It should have been a cross-party thing. As soon as the referendum was called and Cameron resigned, therefore they were all been in it, and it would have been united we stand, divided we fall. At the moment, it seems we are falling divided over whether we leave or stay, because it seems that we seem to be gearing up towards staying in a roundabout way with even less powers. And if we'd actually said, we have a cross-party group and we will then work out everything,
John,
because being practical...
I agree with you, John, but I'm afraid, and it's much of it is to do with our first-past-the-post electoral system, but we have tribal politics in this country, and it seems the party matters much more than the country, and much more than the referendum result. So until we get a kind of electoral reform and a bit of a breakup of these two coalitions, it's very difficult, John, to see how any common sense is ever going to come into any argument.
Well, that's true, Nigel. But the thing is, what should have happened is if they'd acted for the nation, the pass the post system would actually be reformed by now, because the first year we should have been spent on getting our trade negotiations done with the EU, and the second year planning our trade negotiations with the rest of the world to go live on the 30th of March 2019.
John, I agree with you. The transition period was Article 50. That was designed to be the transition period. And now this Prime Minister of ours is prepared to sign us up virtually in perpetuity into something that it gives us even less sovereignty than we have at the moment, because at least now we can trigger Article 50. John, I thank you for your call. John says on Facebook, Corbyn wouldn't have a clue how to negotiate a Brexit. He flip-flops according to what he thinks would keep him in power. Well, there's almost no agreement here, isn't it? Nigel, do you believe, as I do, that David Davis has been, if he'd been allowed to do the deal, we'd be in a stronger, better position? Ray, I do. I think the way he was undermined by Ollie Robbins is quite extraordinary. It shows you the Prime Minister's mindset. But it's okay, folks, we're saved. Stephen Barclay, that political giant, has taken over now as the Brexit minister. I'm sure we're going to be inspired in the days and weeks to come. You've been listening to the Nigel Farage Show here on LBC. I'll be back tomorrow night at 6 p.m. At 3 this afternoon, it's Ian Payne. But up next, it's Majid Nawaz.
Thank you, Nigel. Coming up, a lawyer representing 5 advertising executives who were forced out of their jobs after a diversity drive has said that straight white men feel as if they've had a target on their backs. Are straight white men being discriminated against? Before that, government ministers are refusing to back a bill that aims to tackle forced marriage by increasing the UK's legal marriage to 18, despite campaign groups and forced marriage survivors telling them otherwise. Is forced marriage a concern, and should the legal age for marriage be raised to 18? But first, Dominic Raab warns that Theresa May has allowed Britain to be blackmailed and bullied by Brussels, and that she should toughen her stance on Brexit.